The book of Exodus comes from the Greek meaning exit. The author is the prophet Moses, dates to about the 13th century BC, so that's about 1300 years before the time of our Lord Jesus Christ. The audience is the ancient Israelites. Exodus chapter 1 starts off by saying, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who, accompanied by their households, entered into Egypt with Jacob." If you recall, there was a prophetic prophecy that was stated by Joseph at the very end of Genesis. We're going to check it out here. It reads, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die. God will surely take care of you and lead you up from this land to the land that he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then, putting the sons of Israel under oath, he continued, "When God thus takes care of you, you must bring my bones up from this place." Joseph died at the age of 110, and he was embalmed and laid to rest in a coffin in Egypt. So notice how, so you see how he's saying that in the future sometime God is going to take you out of here and then he's going to bring you to the promised land. So notice that this is going to take place in the future. Well, what happened to Joseph's body? He was embalmed. He was laid to rest in a coffin in Egypt. And during the days of Moses, he's going to be taken out. His remains are going to be taken out of Egypt. So now we see in verse 2, it states, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of Jacob's direct descendants was 70. Joseph was already in Egypt. So notice how it mentions these are the men from whom the tribes come from: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, right? Tribe of Reuben, tribe of Simeon, tribe of Levi, tribe of Judah. And so they all came with their entire household. And it says the total number of Jacob's direct descendants was 70. However, if you look at the most ancient manuscripts like in the Septuagint, Dead Sea Scrolls, it reads 75, which is actually what St. Stephen was referencing in Acts chapter 7. Also, one of the things I'd recommend is to watch my video on Genesis chapter 46 and 47, where I explain this. Why is there a difference? Some Bible translations might say 75, others 70. I explain what's going on there and how it's really not a problem. Now, Joseph and all his brothers and that whole generation died, but the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and became so very numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, who knew nothing of Joseph, rose to power in Egypt. He said to his people, "See, the Israelite people have multiplied and become more numerous than we are. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them to stop their increase. Otherwise, in time of war, they too may join our enemies to fight against us and so leave the land." Now, what is going on here? Notice how Joseph and his father Jacob and his family, they were so loved by the people in the land of Egypt. However, this new government came along. Here where it says a new king who knew nothing of Joseph rose to power in Egypt, this indicates a king who refused to acknowledge the great gift that was Joseph to Egypt, how he saved the whole people of Egypt and even people in surrounding areas who were struggling with the famine back in Genesis. So this king refuses to acknowledge Joseph. And so and this change in government was now a group of people who was very angry with Joseph and his people. It says here, he said to his people, "See, the Israelite people have multiplied and become more numerous than we are." Now, in the Hebrew, what it actually says here in verse 9, it says, "The children of Israel are Rab and mightier than us." Rab means many or much, or it could also mean more. So it's not necessarily that he's saying they're more numerous than us. He could simply be saying that they are many. They're a great multitude. They're increasing in size. And so then it says they are mightier than us, right? So he sees how mighty these people are, right? He sees how great these people are. Well, God promised that back in Genesis chapter 18 to Abraham. He says, "Mighty nation shall come forth from you." Rather than saying, well, this is a people whom God is blessing, and so let me get close to these people. No, instead, what is he saying? He's saying, let's deal shrewdly with them to stop their increase. Otherwise, in time of war, they may join our enemies to fight against us and so leave the land. So he knows, look, these mighty people are actually doing great things for our land, for our economy, but we don't want them to leave. What if a nation, another nation invades us and they join with them? Well, what nation is going to invade them in those times? What is the nation that they're worried about? Well, it's going to have to be a group of people that come from the east, because that is where the Israelites were dwelling, on the eastern side, the eastern delta of Egypt. And so what enemies did they have along the east? Well, let's try to narrow down exactly what group of people it was. What is this change in government here? One of the things you got to remember is that back in Genesis, we talked about the Hyksos, who were essentially a group of people who came from the land of Canaan into Egypt, and they basically filled the power vacuum that was there, and they took charge of Egypt. Hyksos in ancient Egyptian language basically means foreign ruler. That's what it means. And so it's these foreign rulers that came into Egypt and they started ruling over Egypt. These were the people who were ruling during the days of Joseph. And so we see from history at some point they were destroyed. Their power was taken out and the native Egyptians took power again. And so this was the new administration that took power in Egypt. And we see here that eventually what took place is the enslavement of the Israelites because they were concerned about enemies coming in from the east. So if we look at the timeline in ancient Egyptian history, who are these people at these times the ancient Egyptians are concerned with? Well, I'm sure all of you have heard of King Tut, King Tutankhamun, right? King Tut's wife was left widowed after he passed away, and he had no sons to pass over the throne to. So, based on the ancient Egyptian customs, you had pretty much two options as far as the political power was concerned. Her only two options that she could get married to were these individuals here, I and Horemheb. Now, these two individuals were very violent, and they were individuals who King Tut's wife, who's, by the way, her name was Ankhesetumun, she decided to choose neither one. What she instead decided to do is send a letter out to the Hittite king to send her one of his sons so that she could marry him. Well, I and Horemheb ended up finding out about it. So what I did was he sent Horemheb out to the Levant so that he can murder the Hittite.
Right.
And while Horemheb was out in the Levant, I decided to take throne and he became King I or Pharaoh I. And his successor was Horemheb. And so obviously this was not good to the Hittites. The Hittites despised the Egyptians. So now the ancient Egyptians had this concern about the Hittites. Well, guess what? What if they come in from the east, right? Well, look at what he says. Accordingly, they set supervisors over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. So, in other words, the ancient Israelites were enslaved. It says, thus they had to build for Pharaoh the garrison cities of Pithom and Ramses. So, these are storage cities that was very important for economic planning, for famines. And they basically, the ancient Israelites here, it says they built the storage cities or the garrison cities of Pithom and Ramses. So, Pithom and Ramses. There's a issue, however. We just mentioned Pharaoh I. Didn't this take place during the time of King Ramses II? Yes. That is when these cities were built. When was Pithom and Ramses, the city of Ramses, built? Well, it was built under the reign of King Ramses II, which was way later, after the time of Pharaoh I, after the time of Pharaoh Horemheb. So what's going on? Is Moses sort of jumping around? Yes, he is jumping around. He's jumping around here. Okay. It's kind of like if I were to tell you the story of Jesus, and I mentioned how, Jesus' birth, he was born from a virgin, um, and he grew up and he ended up forming his ministry with 12 apostles. He died on a cross. He was buried. He descended to hell, to the realm of the dead, to release those prisoners captive. And then he resurrected from the dead. He ascended to heaven. He is now at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, you know. And King Herod the Great decided when Jesus was a baby to kill all the babies, And so I'm sort of jumping around here, right? I started off, with the birth of Jesus and then to the basically the ascension. And now I am back again to the birth of Jesus, right? So sort of jumping around. That's what Moses is doing here. And so it talks about the new administration, the Hyksos being uh, removed from power. And then it talks about Pharaoh I, and then it talks about uh, Pharaoh Ramses the second. Now it says here, yet the, and by the way, King Ramses the second, Pharaoh Ramses the second, he is the one who was the Exodus Pharaoh. So when Moses left Egypt, it was uh it was Ramses the second, the one who was ruling at that time. And this is an image of him. Now, where is Pithom? Pithom is in Tel El Retaba, right? These are the ruins. This is an image of the ruins of the city of Pithom. And now P. Ramses, aka the city of Ramses, became the imperial capital of Egypt during the reign of Ramses II. And this is 2 kilometers away from Avaris, which is a very important city, because that is where Aaron and Moses were living when they led the people out of Egypt. So notice how it says, yet the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians began to loathe the Israelites, making life bitter. Oh, verse 13. So the Egyptians reduced the Israelites to cruel slavery, making life bitter for them with hard labor at mortar and brick and all kinds of field work, cruelly oppressed in all their labor. So again, it's jumping around. Now it's going to go back to that king who was basically concerned about the Israelites joining the enemies. And it's going to talk about, it's going to talk about now what did he do in order to stop the Israelites from continuing to multiply. Here it says, the king of Egypt told the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was called Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you act as midwives for the Hebrew women, look on the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she may live. And so notice the concern here with the ancient Israelites, joining these enemies. And so this is a solution. Let's kill the boys, right? Because if the girls grow up, they're not going to be joining any army, right? Now, if the boys grow up, they could end up becoming men who will join these foreign armies that are going to invade us. And so kill all the boys, but you could let the females live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, verse 17, the midwives, however, feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt had ordered them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this, allowing the boys to live? So notice that they feared God, so they refused to follow the orders of the king. Now, it doesn't mention the name of the king, right? Pharaohs are not named early in the early books of the Bible. This is in accordance with the ancient Egyptian custom. And the custom dates to about 15th century to 10th century BC, which is a time period that the Bible was written in about the 13th century BC. So in accordance with ancient Egyptian custom, the name of the pharaohs are not mentioned. It just says Pharaoh. But in later books of the Bible, they are named, like in Second Chronicles and Second Kings. So this book is very Egyptian, shows that whoever wrote this spent time in Egypt and was close to that Egyptian culture, right, which Moses was. So this, what they did is right, right? The book of Acts, chapter 5, verse 29, shows us that when a law is intrinsically evil, we are not to follow it as Christians, right? Now, the king of Egypt, it says, summoned them and said, why have you done this, allowing the boys to live? The midwives answered the Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are not like the Egyptian women. They are robust and give birth before the midwife arrives. Now, most interpreters will say that this is a lie that they're saying. So they're stating a lie, but they're stating a lie because they want the children to be safe, right? And of course themselves to be safe as well. And this, Pharaoh has no right to kill. And so the idea is, well, this Pharaoh has no right to kill. Therefore, we're not going to kill those babies for him, and we're going to deceive him, right? And so now the question is, was it right what they did? We know from Acts chapter 5 that it was definitely right for them to not obey Pharaoh, that wicked order. And that's why it says, right, they feared God, right? They refused to do it. And because of that, God blessed them. We see here, therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very numerous. And because the midwives feared God, so it's because they feared God, because they refused to kill, right? It says God built up families for them. Pharaoh then commanded all his people, throw into the Nile every boy that is born, but you may let all the girls live. So now the question is it okay to lie in these circumstances? Is it okay to lie to save a life? A prime example that people give is that, if you're in Nazi Germany and you're hiding Jews in your house, do you have a right to lie to the person, to the Nazi that knocks on your door asking if there's Jews in your house? Do you have a right to lie and to tell them no, right? That is the question. And it is a really good question, right? Is it morally permissible or is it a sin? There's actually two sides to that question, right? Or two sides that give different answers, right? In the Catholic Church. So there's two answers given by Catholic theologians. Number one, they say that no, it is not morally permissible to lie. It is a sin, but considering the fact that that person has no, the person is essentially going to kill, right? Um, it lessens the sin, right? So it is a sin, but it would only be a venial sin, right? Because you're not doing something grave. So it would only be a venial sin. It wouldn't be a mortal sin. Okay, so you're not going to get cut away from God. You're not going to go to hell for this. It's a venial sin, right? But it's still a sin. It's still immoral. We still should avoid doing it. We still should not do it. So then there's other people who say, no, actually, it will be morally permissible and not even a venial sin. So there's that debate going on. Now, the church hasn't stated anything one way or the other, so you're permitted to believe either or in this case. But as far as the conversation is concerned, we have two sides, and both the sides agree that deception is okay in these circumstances. It is fine to deceive these Nazis who want to kill these Jews, these innocent people. It is okay to deceive them. However, they disagree on the means. How are you to deceive them? With a truth or with a lie? The first side that I mentioned that says that lying is always wrong is they say you should deceive these Nazis. Yes, to save those lives, deceive them. However, you can't tell a lie. And so instead, you should deceive them with the truth. Here's an example. Let's say the Nazi knocks on your door and asks, are there Jews in your home? And you say, no, there are no Jews in my home. You should look elsewhere. You'll waste your time here. Now, what if you're hiding Jews, but you're not hiding them inside your home? You're hiding them, say, let's say you built a little house for them in your backyard. They're not in your home. They are in your backyard. So technically, you're not lying. You're telling a truth. And when you say go elsewhere, that's not a lie. That's just an order that you're giving them. And if you say you'll waste your time if you look here, well, they are wasting their time because even if they find the Jews, and they kill them, they just wasted their time because it is a waste of time to sin against God and to commit atrocities against human beings, right? And so that's objectively true, right? So you stated these objective truths, but you stated it in a deceiving manner to cause the person to think, okay, well, it's fine for me to continue and not search this house. And so you're deceiving the person, right? But you're deceiving them with the truth. You're giving them a truth in such a way to cause them to believe something contrary than what they're actually asking for. Now, because of this, the other side says, well, in that case, in these circumstances where it's okay to deceive, it is also okay to lie because you're going to be causing them, you're willfully causing them to believe something other than what they're actually wanting to know, either way. And so the other side will respond by saying, well, yes, but it's not okay to tell a lie ever because why did God give us a mouth? Why did God give us the ability to speak? It is so that we could speak the truth. And the other side will say, well, no, the reason why God gave us a mouth and gave us the ability to speak is so that we could speak in accordance with his will, so that we could speak in such a way that his will can prevail. So for example, in this case, uh, it is morally permissible for us to lie, therefore it wouldn't be a problem. So it really depends on your presuppositions. What are you assuming from the beginning? Are you assuming that it is that, God gave us a mouth so that we could always tell the truth, or did God give us a mouth so that, and it's morally permissible lie? It really depends on your presuppositions there. And so, uh, but both sides agree that it is okay to deceive, for example, in that circumstance, right? And there are situations where it is okay to willfully deceive the person in order to save a life, for example. But the means is the question. How are you to do it, right? What is the way to do it? So notice that Pharaoh believed this lie, and he is saying, okay, well, now time to move on to plan B. And he commanded all his people, throw into the Nile every boy that is born, but you may let all the girls live. And so this is, of course, a very wicked act, and it is done in order to basically attack these people, right? These innocent people. And notice the names of these midwives who decided to do right: Shifra and Pua. Now, it calls them Hebrew midwives, but they were not actually ethnically Hebrew. Um, it's unlikely that they were ethnically Hebrew. They were just midwives for the Hebrew women. Okay. And so Shifra and Pua, who were they exactly? A lot of people believe that they're Egyptian, God-fearing, ancient Egyptian women. Now, why do they say this? Well, because it is very unlikely that Pharaoh would ask Hebrew women to do this, because what is the likelihood? I mean, that's just ridiculous. Asking, a woman to kill the boys of their own community, that just makes no sense. I mean, there's feminists nowadays that probably will have no problem with that, but in these ancient times, that mentality didn't exist. You're not going to kill you're not going to kill people from your own community. You're just not going to do that. And so it's most likely that, of course, they were not Hebrew, but they could be, for example, Egyptian. However, I don't think that they were Egyptian either, because the names Shifra and Pua are Levantine names. They're names that come from the Levant in the Middle East. They don't come from ancient Egyptian. They're not Egyptian names. And so they could be another Levantine group that was living there that Pharaoh said, hey, side with me. Don't side with these Israelites, okay? But of course, they didn't listen. Now, it is possible that there's still that they could be Egyptian women, but they were given these sort of uh, Levantine names, like a sort of like the Levantine version of their ancient Egyptian names. That could be the case, but considering all of the ancient Egyptian loan words that we're going to talk about that later on, and all of these names that we see in the book of Exodus that come from Egyptian, it's unlikely that Moses would just change their names to a Levantine name instead of just giving them their actual Egyptian name. Chapter 2. Now, a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and the woman conceived and bore a son. Now, for those of you wondering, well, it doesn't even mention the name of the people. You'll actually realize later on who are these people, and we're going to see them, both of them by name. So now the question is, well, why aren't they mentioned by name here? The reason is because the Bible is trying to show us that it is an unexpected couple. It's not, your average famous couple. It's not famous artists, famous actors. It's just this unexpected couple who had a child who was going to make a big deal in the society. Seeing what a fine child she was, seeing what a fine child he was, she hid him for 3 months. So now the question is, well, she saw what a fine child he was. So now the question is, had she seen him as ugly, would she not, right? See, my question is, because these are descendants of Levi. That means that they're Israelites. Remember, Levi was one of the sons of Jacob. These are descendants of Levi. These are people from the tribe of Levi. And they had this son, and according to Pharaoh's law, you have to kill that son, right? And so, but she's hiding this son, obviously, right? Because that's her child, right? Why would she do that? She's hiding the child from whom? From the Egyptians, authorities, or anybody who are actually following these laws, right? Because this was a law that Pharaoh gave to his people, meaning the ancient Egyptians, right? If you see an Israelite baby boy, get that baby and kill it. Now, it says here, seeing what a fine child he was, she hid him for 3 months. So let's say he was ugly, right? Would she not hide him? Well, no, that of course not, right? I mean, you know, any mother wouldn't see her child in that light anyway. So like, why is it saying this? Why is it mentioning the beauty of the child? That's because these words are very carefully picked to represent the Messiah. This points to the Messiah. This baby that is born is not the Messiah, but he points to the Messiah. He represents the Messiah here. The Messiah, right? We read in Genesis at the very end of Genesis chapter 49, the last book that we just read, Genesis chapter 49, it talks about the Messiah and it mentions his eyes, how they're dark as wine. Wine represents joy. Wine represents celebration. Wine represents happiness. So when you see his eyes, it brings happiness to you, the beauty of his eyes, right? And so this points to the Messiah himself. But when she could no longer hide him, she took a papyrus basket, daubed it with bitumen and pitch, and putting the child in it, placed it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile. His sister stationed herself at a distance to find out what would happen to him. So it's not the baby's name isn't mentioned, his sister's name isn't mentioned. Later on, we're going to realize who these people are. We're going to see who these people are. We're going to find out their names. But right now, it's just this unexpected group of people, and God is working through them. Look at this. This is an image right here. His mother placing him in this basket of reeds. So she's following the order, all right. She's taking her son to the Nile, but she's placing him on a basket of reeds above the water there. Now, interestingly, why is this happening? That is the question now. It says here, then Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe at the Nile. While her attendants walked along the bank of the Nile, noticing the basket among the reeds, she sent her handmaid to fetch it. On opening it, she looked, and there was a baby boy crying. She was moved with pity for him and said, it is one of the Hebrews' children. So why'd she do this, right? So the baby boy's mother did this because she had faith in God, first and foremost, right? She had faith in God. She listened to the voice of God that this was going to work. She had faith in God. Now, why is she doing this, though? Right? What is the idea? What's the big idea here? Well, by placing him there in the water's going to take him down the stream to the direction these Egyptian women would go. Why? Because she knows the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. They believed in the god of water. So they would think, right, that this is a gift from the god of water, right? That that child should not be rejected. And so they would accept this child. And so she would not have to fear for his life anymore because he would get adopted by one of them. Well, she's going to be adopted by none other than, here it says, Pharaoh's daughter, right? It says, then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter. So notice how God set all this up, and he even set up a human being here, moved with pity. He set up this woman here, this young lady here, so that she could have the right mindset, being moved with pity. And that's why it says there, she was moved with pity for him and said it is one of the Hebrews' children. So even though it was a Hebrew child and she knew it, she didn't dare to throw it in the water and kill it and kill that poor baby. So instead, she did what? Adopted this child. Now we're going to see what happened. It says, then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and summon a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter answered her, go. So the young woman went and called the child's own mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, for she said, I drew him out of the water. So that name Moses comes from Egyptian. And notice he was adopted by this Egyptian woman. And this is an image right here of that occurring. Notice here how this baby boy is Moses. And he was placed in the basket of reeds, which in Hebrew is a tevah, just like Noah was placed in the tevah, aka the ark. In the Hebrew, it's the same word. Ark, basket is the tevah. Noah entered into the tevah to be saved from the waters, and instead, the enemies of God were swallowed up by the water. Just like now in the days of Moses, he was placed in the tevah to be saved from the waters, and later on, the enemies of God will once again be swallowed up by the waters. Considering the region that this was in, remember, as I mentioned earlier, Moses and Aaron were living where? In Avaris. Was there anywhere where, there was an authority near Avaris so that this could occur? Because notice Pharaoh, this is Pharaoh's daughter. But there's two questions now. Number one, how was this Pharaoh's daughter? Considering that in those days, all women in Egypt had the right, culturally speaking, to adopt any child they wanted to without asking their fathers, without asking their husband, except the daughter of Pharaoh. We know this from history. So, how do we reconcile that with this, where we see Pharaoh's daughter doing it, adopting a child? Number two, here's the next question. What Pharaoh was living in this time near Avaris? Well, it was actually the vizier. Who was this vizier? So it was a vizier that eventually became Pharaoh, because notice what it says, Pharaoh's daughter. It doesn't say the vizier's daughter. It says Pharaoh's daughter. So it has to be a person that ended up becoming a Pharaoh, but they were not a Pharaoh just yet, because that's actually the answer also to the previous question. Why is it that Pharaoh's daughter was permitted to adopt this child and she adopted it no problem, even though Pharaoh's daughter wasn't allowed to do that? Because this individual wasn't Pharaoh yet. Later on, he's going to become a Pharaoh. He was a vizier at the time. This is Ramses the First. And just like when we talk about kings of the past, even before they become kings, we refer to them as kings. For example, we're talking about the life of King Adrian the First, right? I don't know if that even is a real king. Uh, but let's say you're talking about I don't know, King Louis or something, right? Even when you're talking about him as a young lad, you still say King Louis, right? King Louis was born. Well, wait a minute, he wasn't King Louis when he was born. Yeah, but he's going to become king later on, right? And so here, Pharaoh, this person is referred to as Pharaoh, even though they're not Pharaoh in the story just yet. They don't become Pharaoh until later on. So that answers the questions there. Now notice how Moses' sister, her name's Miriam, was following along, making sure that her brother was okay. And, she basically told this Pharaoh's daughter here, shall I go and summon a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you? And guess who she called? Moses' mother, Jochebed. Wow. So now she gets to raise her own child, and she gets paid while doing it. Moses obviously was taught the reality of his life, how he was, he was an Israelite, right? The struggles of his people as well there. Now notice how he points to Christ. In his days, they wanted to kill Christ. In the days of Moses, they had a law to kill the baby boys. Just like when Jesus was born, a law was made to kill all the baby boys. And we read that, right? On one occasion, after Moses had grown up, when he had gone out to his kinsmen and witnessed their forced labor, he saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, one of his own kinsmen. So this is an Egyptian slave master beating a Hebrew slave. So we got the slave master beating the slave. Looking about and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. The next day he went out again, and now two Hebrews were fighting. So he asked the culprit, "Why are you striking your companion?" But he replied, "Who has appointed you a ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses became afraid. Moses became afraid and thought the affair must certainly be known. So notice what he did. He killed this Egyptian slave master. He killed this Egyptian slave master, and then he hid his body in the sand. He buried the body. Now, this is very suspicious, right? Let's explain it. What is happening here? Well, we see that this slave is being beaten. He's being beaten, and then Moses comes along and he saves him, okay, from the beating that he's receiving. Now, notice what it says here. It says, he saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, one of his own kinsmen. Looking about and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian. So that term striking and struck down is the same word. So the striking that the Egyptian was doing to the Israelite, Moses then did to the Egyptian. So it doesn't say how he hit him, but he hit him in such a way that he ended up dying. Okay. And then he hid his body in the sand. Now, there's a question of whether or not he did right. Right. Now, there's situations, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church states, where you could end a person's life and not sin. If it's your last resort to save a person's life, it is permissible. Okay, it's not a sin. So it's possible that's what was happening here. The slave was being beaten to death, and so Moses couldn't do anything else except strike the man to stop him, and he ended up killing him in the process, right? There's nothing here that says that it was an intentional killing. Um, in fact, the word that is used for strike, the Egyptian striking a Hebrew, is the same word that is used that Moses struck down the Egyptian. So the same way that he was striking the Hebrew, Moses struck him. Now, a lot of people say, well, he was looking all over the place. He looked about and seeing no one, meaning that he knew that he was going to do something wrong. That's a possible interpretation, but it's also possible that he was looking around to see if anybody was nearby that could help him stop this man. But seeing that there was no one, he had to go up and then he had to stop him. So it's possible that he was doing this sinfully, maybe, or maybe he was doing this honorably. There's not enough information here to really say. If he is acting sinfully, then there's no reason to get scandalized because we see that the patriarchs were not perfect. So don't worry if you're imperfect because God still has a plan for you. Now, let's say that he was acting honorably and he was just protecting this man. He had no other choice but to hit the man. He ended up killing him in the process. And he didn't mean to kill him. He was just trying to stop him. Okay, there's still an issue because it says that he buried the body. And then the next day, when he saw the two Hebrews fighting, and he told the one who was culpable, hey, why are you beating your brother? Why are you fighting? And then, he said, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Who are you? Moses became afraid. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. If you read the book of Acts, chapter 7, Saint Stephen is speaking to the Jews in Jerusalem and he's preaching about Moses and he's saying what Moses did. And he says that Moses thought God has chosen me to free the Israelites. He felt that in his heart, that God chose him to free the Israelites. So if that's the case, then he should have had no reason to fear, right? If he was doing right all along and he knew that God was with him and that God placed him in that situation to protect that slave, he should have said, hey, this is fine. God is going to vindicate me. All right. I was only protecting this man. That's it. I didn't do anything wrong. But what did he do instead? Well, he hid the body and then he ran away. You're going to see here in verse 15, it says, when Pharaoh heard of the affair, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to the land of Midian. So Moses went away. He fled, and now he's away from home. But God is working behind the scenes, building him up. There he sat by a well. Now, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. So now he's away from home and he's at a well, just like Eliezer back in Genesis chapter 24, just like Jacob back in Genesis chapter 29, just like now we see Moses, he's at a well here. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, right? So a well here so far we've seen, you're away from home, you're at a well, and then a marriage takes place afterward. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them away. So Moses rose up at their defense, right? He rose up in their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said to them, how is it you have returned so soon today? They answered, an Egyptian delivered us from the shepherds. So Moses went in, saved them, and he's obviously dressed as an Egyptian. He was born and raised in Egypt, no surprise there. So they confused him so they just thought, an Egyptian saved us, right? He drew water for us and watered the flock. So notice that this priest of Midian, these are Midianites, right? That means that they're descended from Abraham, from Keturah. So this is a priest of Midian, right? More than likely, of course, considering that they're descended from Abraham, is more than likely a priest of God Almighty, right? Some offer sacrifices to God, right? And so we see here it says, "Why did you leave the man there? Invite him to have something to eat." So that, that sort of Middle Eastern hospitality, right? Where is he? Why did you leave the man there? Invite him over. Invite him to have something to eat. Moses agreed to stay with him, and the man gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She conceived and bore a son, whom he named Gershom, for he said, "I am a stranger residing in a foreign land." So he's away from home, but God is working in him to build him up to eventually bring him to the point where he's going to bring the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. A long time passed, during which the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under bondage and cried out, and from their bondage their cry for help went up to God. God heard their moaning, and God was mindful of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the Israelites and God knew. So don't ever feel like, God isn't listening to my prayers. God is listening to you. God is at work. God is working something out. Now, notice that Moses then, he was born at the time of Pharaoh I. He was adopted by Ramses the first's daughter. And then now, who is Pharaoh at this point? Who's the Pharaoh that wanted to kill him? He's now older, and the Pharaoh wanted to kill him. Well, remember, Moses was royalty. So you gotta find a Pharaoh, try to find a Pharaoh who wouldn't care if he's royalty and would straight up give him a harsh punishment. Who fits the bill? Who fits the bill? That would be the successor of Horemheb. So later on, we're going to see that during the days of Ramses II's rule, that's when Moses is going to take them out of slavery in Egypt in the year 1265 BC.